It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2020/1296, a letter dated 28 December 2020 from the permanent representative of Tunisia addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary General and the distinguished heads of state and government, ministers, and other high-level representatives. Your presence today underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion. I now have the honor to give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. António Guterres.
President, Mr. Chairperson, Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year. I thank the Tunisian Presidency for organizing this debate. Addressing the links between fragility and conflict is an essential component of international peace and security. Fragility and conflict are among the greatest obstacles to implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the conflict landscape was deteriorating. Conflicts have become more complex, fueled by greater regionalization, the proliferation of non-state armed groups, and their linkages with criminal and even terrorist interests. They last longer and become more difficult to resolve. According to the World Bank Fragility and Conflict Report, 1 of every 5 people in the Middle East and North Africa live in close proximity to a major conflict. And as a consequence, humanitarian needs have multiplied, reaching the highest levels since the Second World War. The number of people at risk of starvation has doubled. International conflict management mechanisms have been stretched to the breaking point. And these trends have placed a number of countries in a vicious cycle. Conflict continues to breed poverty and foster institutional fragility, which in turn decreases the resilience of these societies and the prospects for peace. By 2030, the World Bank estimates that 2/3 of the world's extreme poor will live in fragile or conflict-affected countries. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic has further exacerbated these trends. In 2020, and for the first time in 22 years, extreme poverty was on the rise. The contraction of economic activity in fragile and conflict-affected settings is expected to push an additional 18 to 27 million people into extreme poverty. The gender equality gap is widening, and women's labor force participation, a key driver for inclusive growth, has been set back decades. The climate emergency is a further driver of insecurity. It is no coincidence that of the 15 countries more susceptible to climate risks, 8 host a United Nations peacekeeping operation or special political mission. From the Sahel and Central Africa to the Horn of Africa, variability in rainfall patterns is disrupting long-existing patterns of transhumance, resulting in tensions and recurring clashes between communities including across national borders. Excellencies, if we are to break the cycle of poverty and conflict, we need a more ambitious approach based on two principles enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals. First, interdependence. The 2030 Agenda recognizes that there can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. A holistic approach to building and sustaining peace with targeted and tailored investments across the humanitarian development peace nexus is essential. In the Sahel, for example, the UN integrated strategy has sought to close the gap between humanitarian needs and development imperatives. And it has focused on helping reassert state authority throughout the Sahel countries, thereby reversing the pattern of growing marginalization of poor rural societies, with particular attention to women and youth. Second, inclusion. The pledge to leave no one behind must be at the center of our efforts to promote sustainable development, as well as to prevent and resolve conflicts. Over 20 years ago, the Security Council recognized in adopting Resolution 1325 the need for increased participation of women in peace processes. This promise has yet to be fully realized. Guaranteeing equal opportunities, protection, access to resources and services, and participation in decision-making are not simply moral and legal obligations. They are a necessary condition if countries are to truly break out the conflict trap. Mr. President, the linkages between conflict and fragility have been particularly visible in the African continent. In the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, fragility has been exacerbated by transboundary threats such as climate change, terrorism, transnational organized crime, and the proliferation of armed groups. In the Great Lakes and Central African region, limited state authority, the continued presence and activities of armed groups, human rights violations, illicit exploitation of natural resources, and unemployment continue to drive instability. To address these trends, the United Nations has worked closely with the African Union and regional economic communities. The UN-AU joint frameworks on peace and security and on sustainable development have been key instruments to prevent and sustainably resolve conflicts in Africa, as well as to strengthen the resilience of states to withstand current threats. 1 month ago, Chairperson Faki and I co-chaired the 4th United Nations African Union Annual Conference, a clear demonstration of the value attached to our partnership and to our strategic cooperation. This meeting was an opportunity for us to identify ways to support the AU's Silencing the Guns initiative, a groundbreaking effort to address the root causes of conflicts in the continent, including economic and social disparities. And my call for a global ceasefire goes hand in hand with this flagship initiative of the African Union. The United Nations also remains committed to supporting the African Union's ambitious Agenda 2063. In this context, we have decided to establish a joint UN-AU group on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda and Agenda 2063, including with regard to COVID-19 recovery. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, we know that prevention and peace building save lives and are cost-effective, especially when strategies come together across the peace, development, and humanitarian nexus in support of national priorities. However, they also require national leadership, political commitment, and financial support. Yet, the international community continues to underinvest in these areas. That is why I have repeatedly called for increased financing for prevention and peace building. The Peace Building Fund is well placed to help link our responses to multidimensional crises. On the 26th of January,
Please.
African member states have heeded the calls of the international community to respond to major crises with significant regional and global implications, from the deployment of AMISOM in Somalia to the G5 Sahel force and the multinational joint task force against Boko Haram. African Union peace support operations authorized by the Security Council require predictable, flexible, and sustained financing through assessed contributions. I call on the Council to finalize its discussion on this matter. Partnerships with international financial institutions are another critical way to ensure that adequate funding reaches key areas. I welcome the World Bank's Fragility, Conflict and Violence strategy. This opens the way for much deeper investment in nationally led prevention efforts. Our country teams and missions on the ground are working closely with governments and the World Bank in some 40 countries affected by fragility and conflict. Together, we are focusing on food insecurity, supporting displaced people and host communities, and creating opportunities for women and young people. I want this partnership to grow in the years ahead. Mr. President, the Security Council has a critical role to play in addressing the links between fragility and conflict. By acting early and preventively, by engaging strategically to address the root causes of conflict, and speaking with one voice, the Council can mobilize the international community's political and financial support, shed a spotlight on critical areas of need, and foster the commitment of conflict actors where needed. I look forward to continuing our engagement in this area. Thank you.
I would like to thank His Excellency the Secretary General for addressing these important issues and for sharing with us his vision of the efforts that we all need to take within the United Nations and the Security Council in particular. Following this briefing from His Excellency the Secretary General, I would now give the floor to His Excellency Moussa Faki Mohammed.
فخامة الرئيس قيس
Your Excellency, President of Tunisia,
Excellencies, Heads of State, members of the Security Council, United Nations Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I wish to take this opportunity to express to you, President of the Council, as well as to all members of the Council, my best wishes for peace, security, and particularly good health at this difficult time, at a time we are tackling COVID-19. I'd also like to congratulate the President of Tunisia for taking up the presidency of the Security Council for January 2021. I would like to thank him for including on the Council's agenda this important topic on the challenges of maintaining peace and security in fragile contexts. Indeed, this is really an issue that is at the heart of the African Union's concerns, because it's in Africa that the issue of state fragility and peacekeeping issues are most acute. As proof of this, we can see the situation in the Sahel and are in the Lake Chad Basin. Only a few days ago, we saw a massacre of more than 100 Nigerian civilians. The President of the Republic of Niger, who is here with us today, I'm sure he will be able to speak to this further. I would like to express to him our condolences and our compassion. But that is not enough. Let's bear this in mind. President, the current threats to peace, international peace and security, which are created by factors such as conflict, terrorism, violent extremism, radicalization, transnational organized crime, and the grave effects of climate change, deadly communicable diseases and pandemics, all of these have huge ramifications, particularly for the most fragile states and the most vulnerable people. With the current spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, this tragic reality has reached new heights. We've also seen the impact of the health and the devastating health and socioeconomic impacts, which have had various consequences on states. States' fragility remains a major obstacle to development in Africa, and overcoming these challenges is an absolute priority for the African Union, and it remains one of the pillars of our international agenda. When it was created, the African Union adopted policies, instruments and tools to support member states and build their capacity to prevent conflicts and tension. They are obstacles to peace, stability and development for them all. The establishment of 2002 of the African Peace and Security Council and the African governance architecture, as well as its guidelines to promote security, peace and stability, effectively covers all aspects of prevention, management, and post-conflict reconstruction. The African Peace and Security Commission, as well as the African Union Commission, as well as Unity for Support for Mediation, have made significant progress in addressing conflicts around the continent. The efforts to rebuild peace and have ensured preventive diplomacy within the African Union, which was supported by a particular effective group of envoys and special representatives, high representatives, as well as liaison officers and mission officers around the continent, have playing an active role in achieving these goals. Convinced as we are that we should not remain silent before these dramas in Africa, and we should not let other people decide the fate of Africa either, the African Union is working tirelessly to develop the principle of African solutions to African problems. This approach has allowed us to address several crises and conflicts around the continent and has allowed us to address the adjacent issues to conflicts, which also is then addressing the sources of this fragility. Excellencies, President, the framework agreement signed between the EU and the UN, for example, on peace and security and governance and development, this lays the foundation for cooperation. Unfortunately, we have lost sound for the speaker. For us, the African Union, strengthened by the agreements in April 2017 and January 2018, reaffirms the need to work together and ensure strategic mobilization to eradicate the causes of this fragility, which is faced by many African states, and to provide appropriate responses that are consistent and decisive to prevent and manage conflicts in Africa. High levels of consultation between the Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Commission seeks to promote this very objective. These consultations improve our shared understanding of the challenges before us, and it refines how our responses, including through preventive diplomacy. They also provide a significant contribution to development, to multilateralism that has been undermined by national egoism and the breaking of humanism and chains of international solidarity. The bodies of the United Nations Security Council has been contributing to these efforts, adopting Resolution 2457, which calls for the mobilization of the UN and its institutions to support the African Union in the implementation of its objective to silence the guns in Africa. Results achieved so far, thanks to this collaboration, are very laudable. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, Mr. President, that it's only through pooling our expertise and our resources that we'll be able to respond to the challenges that we face. Although some progress has been made in close coordination with regional organizations and with the strong support of the United Nations, we must also recognize that a certain number of them continue to compromise our capacity to effectively fulfill our mandate. For example, this is in terms of access of predictable resources, lasting support for operations that have been decided upon or led by the African Union, and they require clear and robust mandates. Along the same vein, we remain aware of the primary responsibility of our member states to prevent. We've lost the speaker's sound, has been cut off. And this also includes human rights. President, in our approaches to these crises, exclusion is something that we see to be one of the key issues. We cannot exclude women. We cannot exclude women or young people in our efforts, as they are the lifeblood of our society. We also have other innovative approaches that go far beyond simple speeches. Through today's debate, our duty is to see further impetus of our efforts to fight against exclusion, social injustice, unilateral approaches, and defiance to solidarity. I thank you very much.
شكرا.
I thank you, Your Excellency, Mr. Faki Mohammed, for this very important briefing that covered some of the reasons or causes that led to this fragility. For this fragility has economic and social causes, and we cannot eradicate violence and conflict before we eradicate this fragility and resolve these social and economic challenges. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf.
Excellency, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellency, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Excellencies and distinguished members of the Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for the opportunity to make a few points I believe to be relevant to the purpose of this meeting. The first is to congratulate you, Mr. President, on your country's presidency of the Security Council and for your leadership of this high-level open debate on the maintenance of peace and security in fragile countries. This is only the first week of 2021, a year to which the whole world has looked forward. This is probably never a time when so many wanted and needed a previous year to end, while clinging to the hope of a new year of promise and cautious optimism. This open debate must also then be faithful to that promise and commit to new and bold steps. Excellencies, you members of the United Nations Security Council, and one of its most important organs, have the power in your hands to help to end the vicious cycle of conflict, displacement, and despair so many have faced for so many years. You can look beyond narrow interests and recognize that peaceful, just, and inclusive societies have benefits far beyond their own borders. You know that unattended issues in societies fester and deepen fragility, which often leads to violent conflicts. Excellency, you also know that early interventions which support local responses to governance and poverty fault lines can build resistance. You have also seen that women peace and security actors can help put out a small smoldering fire before it becomes a major conflagration. I express my gratitude here once again for the support for interventions in my own country, Liberia, and would like to highlight the 3 keys to ending brutal armed conflict. First, the degree for peace by ordinary Liberians tired of war. Second, the robust mandate of the regional peacekeeping force and their understanding of the threats posed to regional security. And third, the subsequent international support for the final peace agreement and the timely partnership as we pulled ourselves up, albeit exhausted, bruised, and battered. However, prevention is always better than cure. And in almost every case, interventions are almost too late. The signs, like most situations which spark into active conflict, are usually there long before any helpful actions are taken. They include persistent torture and extrajudicial killings, ethnicity to consolidate power, women and girls targeted as the loot of war, poverty and inequalities deepened, social services disruption, traditional conflict resolution mechanism dismantled and disrespected. In Liberia's case, the regional peacekeeper force took us into an electoral process, which, while highly flawed, was a step on the path to peace. The United Nations International Peacekeeping Mission was a partner for the implementation of the final peace agreement, ensuring the protection of civilians during the sporadic but persistent outbreaks of conflict by new armed militia seeking to remove contested winners of the election. Another key was women leadership. Women from all walks of life literally sat for peace, following the male combatants as they lurched from one failed agreement to another. Without Liberian women, Liberia would not have had peace today. Today, peacekeepers must also battle COVID-19 while supporting peace and containing conflicts. As with multilateralism, countries are questioning the efficacy of peacekeeping operations and the cost of running them, often for years at a time. I differ and remain a strong advocate for peacekeeping. However, the architecture must, like everything else, change with flexibility to respond to challenging circumstances. flexibility in consonance with recognition of and support to local capability and leadership when the warning bells ring. Just consider, Excellency, what would result if some 25% of financing for peacekeeping were allocated to a technical training contingent of peacekeepers dedicated to training young, unemployed, potential militants. Mr. President, last year we celebrated the 7th anniversary of the United Nations. We recognized the Secretary General, particularly for the strong advocate leadership on climate change and his call for silencing his guns to be able to battle the COVID virus more effectively. We now need the Secretary General's equally strong words to national authorities for their actionable response to his advocacy. This year commemorates the 70th anniversary of UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. While we commend the leadership and staff of that agency, its continued existence is a mark on our collective conscience. It means that we have not pursued peace, not addressed fragility. What will we say now at the beginning of this year of promise? More platitudes? I plead yet again, the United Nations and its many organs, especially Your Excellency, the Security Council, was established to lead the process of global development and global equity. The United Nations must continue to represent more than hope. It must be an active mechanism for peace and scaled up support for the fragile nations that for too long have been left behind. Finally, Mr. President, Excellencies and distinguished members of the Council, the COVID-19 pandemic is a painful human tragedy. I extend deepest condolences to all who are grieving for loved ones and pray for the speedy recovery for the infected. We hope that we can see peace in this new year and an end to the ravages of the pandemic through an equitable distribution of the vaccines. I thank you, Excellencies, for inviting me and for your kind attention.
شكرا جزيلا وعميقا على هذه الأفكار التي تقدمتم بها.
Thank you very much for that statement, which addressed the various situations. Tunisia will not hesitate to propose solutions that can benefit our collective unity and help the UN's work in this regard. I will now deliver a statement in my capacity as President of Tunisia. Ladies and gentlemen, the choice of today's topic, that is to say, challenges of maintaining peace and security in fragile contexts, stems from our strong determination to underscore the importance of fragile contexts that can fuel violence and which in addition can prolong conflicts, some conflicts which have lasted for decades. These are conflicts that also can fuel new conflicts that can arise in the future. These contexts hinder states' capacity and can even threaten their very existence. We must also remember that these contexts undermine efforts to bring about democracy and economic and social progress. We can particularly see this in Africa. Africa, which has suffered so much from conflicts and which has also endured the losses of human lives as a result of wars and conflicts. We can also see human tragedies. Tragedies that prevent stability, notably in post-conflict situations. We believe that ending wars and conflicts doesn't necessarily always lead to lasting peace. We must ensure that we keep the goal in mind of bringing about lasting peace over time. In addition to this, ceasefires don't necessarily mean that conflicts have ended, but rather they are a first significant step for conflicts to be peacefully resolved. Maintaining peace and stability indeed requires an holistic approach which must also be multipartite and lasting and sustainable in nature. This approach must address the root causes of conflicts, notably factors that exacerbate fragility. These factors can include poverty, unemployment, marginalization, exclusion, and, in addition, the weakening of human development and the weakening of state institutions. These are some of the most significant factors that threaten states, without overlooking the weakening of governance and terrorism, violent extremism, and transnational organized crime. And, in addition, the impacts of climate change, limited, scarce resources, and the spread of pandemics. What we have there is a vicious circle which stokes violence and conflicts. And which also threatens social cohesion. In addition to this, these factors can also lead to waves of displacement. which can hinder national and international efforts to re-establish peace and stability. And this in post-conflict situations. This is the reason why peace-building efforts need to focus on stability and progressively addressing fragility. This needs to be done so that development and prosperity can be achieved. In addition, this process must also bear in mind the threats to peace. And the necessary guarantees must be provided to uphold international peace and security. This involves promoting human rights, democracy, good governance, and ensuring inclusive participation, the participation of all areas of society, including women and young people. Ladies and gentlemen, on different continents and in different regions, notably in Africa, and 6 decades after several countries attained their independence, violence continues and conflicts also persist, and different factors behind fragility also persist. This has certainly led to complex threats and challenges, which are also multidimensional in nature. This, therefore, is an urgent security, social, health, and economic situation. These regions have also seen violence and terrorism. These challenges and the situations that result from these challenges and the factors that result from them include many different examples. I would not be able to address all of these examples today. Nevertheless, it remains the case that the Security Council should adopt a more comprehensive approach to international security. This approach must bear in mind the overlapping nature of factors behind fragility on the one hand, and violence, armed conflicts on the other hand. In addition, these challenges also require a multidisciplinary approach and response, and they require the work of various stakeholders at the international level within the context of a coordinated, integrated, concerted approach. We welcome the highly significant work of the African Union and the work of other sub-regional organizations. This role aims to overcome difficult situations. By way of example, I could cite the AU initiative to silence the guns. We do indeed hope that these guns will be silenced, and we do hope no longer to hear the sound of explosions. The United Nations, including all of its agencies, must also contribute effectively and efficiently to this effort in addressing the underlying causes of fragility, these causes that represent a threat to peace and security, and which only fuel conflict and violence. The efforts undertaken by the UN, and also efforts made at the regional and national level in this regard, must be integrated. This is highly significant. In addition to this, it is also of paramount importance that all countries work together in this effort. All relevant stakeholders must work together. When it comes also to the UN's funds, programs and agencies, in addition to that at the regional level, but also international financial institutions and donors. This must be done so that a global comprehensive strategy can be achieved, a strategy that can bring about peace. Strategies for peace building based on the capacity of the countries involved and on national ownership of the programs that aim to put an end to poverty, conflicts, and fragility. These programs must also bring about stability and implement the Sustainable Development Goals at the same time. Prevention has always been one of the best means of bringing about peace and peace building. Hence, the UN Security Council, in line with its responsibility in this regard, should support conflict prevention initiatives, as well as the rule of law, and bolstering national institutions' capacity, and also strengthening national and international efforts to bring about development and a decent, dignified life for all strata of society, and this throughout the world. It is without doubt that this is the best choice in political and ethical terms, first and foremost, but it is also, in addition, the least costly choice for the United Nations and for the international community. There can be no security, no peace without development. And it must be fair development, integrated development, and sustainable development. Sustainable development, preserving human dignity throughout the world, to allow all peoples to enjoy their rights, to uphold their rights, including the right to development. Ladies and gentlemen, you are surely aware that the pandemic that has ravaged the entire world in 2020, indeed a pandemic that continues to endure, this pandemic has of course destabilized all aspects of our life. The consequences of the pandemic have affected all of our lives. However, the repercussions of this pandemic have been much more severe in fragile contexts, in contexts where poverty exists. These effects of the pandemic have exacerbated the socioeconomic challenges that were already there and trends towards violence and human tragedies, as well as threats weighing on international peace and security. In the light of these circumstances, we would like to reiterate our appeal for international cooperation to be strengthened to deal with this unprecedented threat. And this under a vision based on genuine human solidarity. A vision that would bear in mind all factors that exacerbate conflicts, and which also extend conflicts. Pandemics do not recognize borders. They do not exclude anyone. After all, pandemics are phenomena that are exacerbated by fragility. In this race against time, it's not possible to work alone. We must be nations united. We must work together. We would like to take this opportunity to underscore the fact that the COVID vaccines and medicines must be made available to all. No one is safe until everyone is safe. We also take the opportunity presented by this meeting to remind all parties to conflicts in the world, throughout the world. We call on them to heed the appeal made by the Secretary General to put an end to all conflicts and fighting, and to act in line with Resolution 2532, a resolution that was adopted unanimously by the Security Council at the beginning of July last year. This resolution was presented jointly by Tunisia and France. This resolution paved the way for the international community to come up with an effective response to the pandemic. We need to ensure that our work is effective, and we need to explore new means and ways to lead us towards a new future for all, on an equal footing without any kind of exclusion. We would also like to take this opportunity at the time when Tunisia is presiding over the Security Council. We would like to take this opportunity to reaffirm Tunisia's commitment to peace, security, and sustainable development. So that we can meet the legitimate aspirations of all peoples in the world to bring about a world that is fairer, more peaceful and more prosperous, a world in which we leave no one behind. Among the legitimate rights that we could underscore and recall this includes the right of the Palestinian people to its land. We must all contribute to bring about a new story for all of humanity. Let us meet this challenge. May the peace of God be with you all.
I now resume my functions as President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Issoufou Mohamedou, President of Niger. You have the floor.
Mr. President, we can't hear. Could you please check that your microphone is unmuted? We can't hear you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, as we are aware, fragile contexts are very difficult to define. Fragility is more than just a question of economic growth or an institutional question or an issue of conflict. For example, the Peace Building Fund has calculated states' fragility indexes based on 12 criteria. These in particular include economic inequality, public services, demographic and migratory pressure, and security, in particular terrorism, climate change, ethnic divisions, human rights, illegal financial flows, corruption, an unfavorable business climate, and new technologies, etc. The World Bank has established a country policy and institutional assessment, the CPIA, which assesses economic management and structural policies, and also equity and social inclusion policies and good governance. There is a threshold below which a country is considered as fragile. Fragile states are also defined as ones in which poor people do not have access to basic services because the authorities are not willing or are not able to provide them. They can also be states that have a low capacity for carrying out basic government functions and that are not able to develop constructive, mutually beneficial relations with society. Countries that host UN peacekeeping missions or regional missions those who've done so over the past 3 years, are also considered as fragile. Situations of fragility, conflict, and violence also affect low-income countries and also middle-income countries as well. So those are middle-income countries as well. An African Development Bank report states that almost all extremely fragile states were, at the time the report was distributed, that had rather abundant natural resources, thus prove that poorly managed natural resources are a factor of conflict and fragility. However, this is also a source of resilience when these natural resources are well managed. Another good example of this was Sierra Leone, which is rich in diamonds. In the report, the African Development Bank states that fragility covers a large area that differs depending on geographical scope and the frequency of conflicts, ranging from open hostilities between belligerent parties to states where there is sporadic violence. This can also be triggered by a failure or a rigged election, an attempt to amend the constitution for self-centered political gains, or a natural disaster, or a pandemic, as we see today with COVID-19. In 2018, there were 58 fragile contexts in the world. Mr. President, it seems that fragility is one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century, in particular since fragile contexts are increasingly the battleground for geopolitical rivalries. Conflicts, terrorism, pandemics, forced displacement, disasters, and famine often take root in fragility. These factors are both the cause and effect of fragility. Poverty is increasingly concentrated in fragile contexts. If nothing is done going forward, 80% of poor people on the planet could live in fragile contexts. This is incompatible with the vision of a better world enshrined in the African Union 2063 agenda and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. It is estimated that 65% and 60% of the global population, respectively, that does not have access to water or sufficient food, they live in fragile states. COVID-19, that is currently raging, is worsening the situation. It is threatening to wipe out several decades of progress in terms of poverty reduction and development. In 2020, between 18 and 27 million additional people were plunged into poverty. Furthermore, flows of IDPs and refugees keep increasing. Mr. President, we need to take stock of fragility and make it a priority if we want a better world. We need to take into consideration its complex nature, and we need to tackle it in all its dimensions. We must never lose sight of our ultimate goal, which is to provide hope and a better existence to all those living in fragile contexts. There's a need to step up prevention efforts and those of peace and security by investing more resources, by investing more intelligent and more aid, and by investing in data in order to better understand the different states of fragility. The aim is to forecast and strengthen the capacity of the authorities to provide inclusive solutions to their own state of fragility in order to improve communities' resilience. There's also a need, of course, to bolster international regional architecture for managing wars, and peace. In sum, the root causes of fragility need to be tackled. In order to do so, greater cooperation is necessary between stakeholders in the humanitarian sector and working in development, peace, and security. There's a need to encourage institutions such as the World Bank and the African Development Bank that have facilities for fragile states to do more. Mr. President, Africa is most certainly the continent where we see the most fragile contexts. Helping Africa to implement the 2063 Agenda and its plans and projects is the only way of ensuring Africa move on from a state of fragility. There's a need in particular to support the establishment of the African Continent Free Trade Area and also infrastructure development and plans to develop agriculture and the industry in Africa. There's a particular attention should be paid to fragile regions such as those of the Sahel, where states are confronted with all factors of fragility, in particular security, climate and demographic challenges. In this region, we need more than ever strong democratic institutions and strengthened security and defense capacity, and also we need development. In particular, we need a Chapter 7 mandate for the G5 Sahel Joint Force. We need as broad involvement as possible of the international community in the international coalition to counter terrorism in the Sahel. We reiterate our call to all of our technical and financial partners to finance the G5 Sahel Priority Investment Programme adopted in Nouakchott in December 2018. We would like to thank the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. António Guterres, for his ongoing advocacy for the people of the Sahel. What is happening in the Sahel and in the Lake Chad is something that strikes the entire international community. The massacre of more than 100 innocent people on the border with Mali is something that reminds us starkly of this. The international community must mobilize to help the countries in the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin to move on from this fragile context, the primary victims of which are women and children. We cherish the hope that the Security Council, whose role it is to ensure international peace and security, will put the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin region at the center of its agenda, and that the Tunisian presidency of the Security Council will be extremely successful. Thank you very much indeed.
I thank you, Your Excellency, for this important intervention on the situation currently in Africa and around the world. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of Kenya. I give you the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency Kais Saied, President of the Republic of Tunisia, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin at the very onset to congratulate you, my brother, on your assuming to the presidency of the Security Council for the month of January 2021. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate India, Mexico, Ireland, and Norway, with whom we have joined the Security Council as elected members for the period 2021-2022. I thank their Excellencies Mr. António Guterres, Mr. Moussa Faki Mahamat, and former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf for their informative briefings. Mr. President, this high-level debate demands that we revisit the very reason the United Nations exists, how multilateralism can be made fit for purpose in maintaining peace today. Mr. President, the fact that the Security Council spends the bulk of its agenda on conflicts in Africa is a testament to the fragility of many countries and regions on our continent. And here I wish to convey my condolences to you, President Youssoufou, and the people of Niger for the loss of so many innocent lives. So, Mr. President, if we are to be true to the founding charter of the UN, it follows, therefore, that we should invest more in building more effective approaches or revitalizing existing mechanisms that maintain peace and anchor stability on the African continent. In Africa, the capacity of the state in most fragile situations has not grown sufficiently to effectively control every part of its territory. Its ability to deliver public goods and services to all citizens has also been limited. And in the meantime, the most dangerous challenges facing countries have multiplied. Globalization may have expanded our economic opportunities, but it has also further shrunk the role of the state. To add to the fragility, multilateral institutions have also often lacked the resource and the know-how and fit-for-purpose mandates to effectively support states facing dire security challenges. The competence and reach of the state is therefore the single most important national and global asset in maintaining peace in fragile situations. Mr. President, if we take as an example the response to COVID-19 pandemic, the biggest difference is not between Eastern and Western approaches. It is between states that can provide a strong bridge to allow their citizens and economies to successfully navigate extreme crisis versus those that cannot muster such an effort. In countries affected by war or recovering from it, peace will only be maintained if they are enabled to be strong enough to win control over their territories and provide public goods and services. The multilateral system, as embodied in the United Nations, will therefore need to help fragile states attain such capacity. The political processes that build peace and binding resolutions by this Council should include measurable state strengthening elements. Mr. President, let me close with 4 proposals to building a multilateral system for our times. First, we must leverage on the knowledge and buy-in of stakeholders closest to the crisis. That means listening to, empowering national actors committed to building bipartisan and non-partisan political bridges to peace and security. This focus should dovetail with the Security Council prioritizing closer cooperation with mechanisms such as the African Union and the regional economic communities. Secondly, Mr. President, the Security Council and associated UN bodies should do more to strengthen the capacity of key state institutions during post-conflict reconstruction. The Peace-Building Commission will play an invaluable role, which Kenya will support closely over the next 2 years. Third, we should not let the COVID-19 pandemic be a major driver of insecurity. If fragile countries do not get prompt access to vaccines, their economic problems will likely turn into political as well as security challenges. So affordable and quick access to COVID-19 vaccines should therefore be regarded as a valuable investment in peace. I want to commend you, Mr. President, for the pivotal role that Tunisia has played in the adoption of Resolution 2532, by which the Council recognized the grave and devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in countries in conflict or post-conflict situations. My fourth proposal, Mr. President, is that I also believe we must strengthen the role of Africa and the Global South in the multilateral system. The road to revitalizing multilateralism to effectively deliver global peace and security runs through a united Africa and an active and engaged Global South. In this regard, I applaud, through you, my brother Ralph, the election of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and also for becoming the +1 of the Africa 3. This action allows the hundreds of millions in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world to believe that their voice in the Security Council matters. That belief will lead to greater faith in the United Nations and its decisions, and it is for this reason that I have also tasked our mission at the UN to be a strong voice for a united Africa and for the Global South, as well as the General Assembly. Once again, I thank you, Mr. President, for the invitation and thank all members for their kind attention. Thank you.
I thank you, Your Excellency, the President of Kenya, for this intervention filled with important and noble values for our African continent and the world. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs from St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
We can't hear you, Prime Minister. Excuse me. Could you check your microphone, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, St. Vincent and the Grenadines commends the Republic of Tunisia for convening today's open debate. Addressing the root causes of fragility is fundamental to maintaining peace and security. And to this end, we thank the Secretary General and other esteemed briefers for sharing important insights on this salient topic. I am particularly gratified for the profound reflections on this matter by the distinguished presidents of Tunisia, Niger, and Kenya, the A3 on the Security Council, with which countries St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been working closely as the A3+1. I thank my dear brother, Uhuru, the distinguished president of Kenya, for his kind words in relation to Ralph and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Excellencies, the year 2020 has been an immensely challenging one, which offered many important lessons, not the least of which is the importance of multilateralism. Amidst the continuously expanding public health, socioeconomic, humanitarian, and security challenges experienced the world over, there is a clear and present need for practical and people-centered solutions that bolster national ownership in countries that require assistance. To be sure, there is no magic panacea for the root causes of fragility, which include, amongst other factors, the debilitating effects of climate change and environmental degradation, food and health insecurity, poverty and underdevelopment. But through solidarity and collective action, a better future remains within the grasp of those who yearn for it, from Haiti to the Horn of Africa, and from the Sahel to Yemen. During our presidency in November, St. Vincent and the Grenadines hosted a high-level event on the contemporary drivers of conflict and insecurity. We used the opportunity of today's meeting to recall that in their collective wisdom, our briefers, council members, and the wider UN membership called for a comprehensive and coordinated whole-of-system approach to addressing the root and proximate causes of fragility and insecurity, including those that have been left largely unsettled by the rapid process of decolonization. The Security Council must continue to play a leading role as it works more closely with the other main organs of the United Nations, namely the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, to foster developmental solutions to the challenges of peace and security. We must also leverage more often the strategic advisory capacity and convening platform of the Peace-Building Commission to mobilize multilateral partners, including regional and sub-regional organizations and international financial institutions, to assist member states in building institutions, strengthening capacities, and addressing the challenges of fragility. As we advance together in this important decade of action to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, greater political will is needed by all member states if we are to make good on the promise of leaving no one behind. We reiterate our appeal to developed countries to honor their overseas development assistance commitments, to provide scaled-up support to conflict-affected countries through concessionary loans, debt relief, and quick impact projects, and to provide greater support for climate adaptation and mitigation to alleviate climate-driven security risks in fragile contexts. We also echo the calls of Sir Hilary Beckles, our keynote speaker in November, for the Special Committee on Decolonization to finalize its important work, and for reparations to be provided for the historical crimes of native genocide, African slavery, and violent colonization, which have left severe legacies of underdevelopment in their wake. Reparatory justice must form part of any serious international development agenda. Finally, we encourage all countries to adhere fully with the principles of international law, and in so doing, to refrain from all forms of unilateral coercion imposed on weaker nations. Even in the most difficult of circumstances, a firm commitment to the timeless principles of sovereignty and political independence within the frame of a mature multilateralism provides the greatest assurances against chaos and disorder. Excellencies, the history of human civilization is punctuated by awesome challenges that brought people together and created much needed catalysts for positive change. Just as the Second World War provided the impetus for this United Nations to emerge from the ashes of conflict, so too can the COVID-19 pandemic be used as a critical turning point where we pursue collectively and earnestly a renewed and effective multilateralism that works in the interests of all nations and peoples. And that applies to in respect of the vaccine. Let us seize this moment and fashion a better future for all of humanity. It is time for appropriate action. Thank you.
على هذه الكلمة التي تناولتم فيها قضايا.
I thank you very much for your statement. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, we so sorely need new concepts, ones that enjoy consensus and that demonstrate our solidarity. Over the decades, several concepts have emerged, particularly in the states that we deem today to be fragile. Fragile states who were then deemed to be developing countries, and there are various definitions, more and more. So, it is important to be able to define these concepts in a joint way so that we can overcome today's challenges. We need more justice within states and on an international level too. Thank you all very much for your participation in today's debate and for your very relevant statements so far. You have raised thoughts about how we can address this in the future. I now give the floor to the Prime Minister of Tunisia, the Prime Minister of Tunisia, who will now facilitate the rest of this debate. May peace be with you. President, the Republic would like to thank you for having facilitated the first part of our debate. I now take up the baton and I will continue to facilitate the debate today. I now give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway. I would like to congratulate Norway, India and Kenya too, and new members of the Security Council. I'll give you the floor, Madam Minister.
So, Mr. President, I hope the sound is on. And I first of all want to thank you very much for convening this debate. And let me also take this opportunity to strongly condemn the horrific attacks on civilians in Niger, including a large number of young children. I would like to offer my sincere condolences to everyone. Maintaining peace and security in fragile contexts require a determined and long-term effort based on a very solid understanding of the root causes. Firstly, poor governance and human rights violations combined with a lack of development, a scarcity of jobs, and poor prospects for the future are all indications of countries and regions moving into fragility. Secondly, systemic corruption and inequality are mutually reinforcing and increase the risk of conflict and destabilization. And this may in turn amplify the potential for terrorist groups to grow by providing them with funds and access to recruits. Thirdly, there's a substantial overlap between fragility and climate vulnerability. Of the 20 countries most vulnerable to climate change, half of them are also struggling with violent conflict. Mr. President, assisting countries and regions in bringing conflicts to an end and laying the foundations for sustainable peace requires concerted action across all the pillars and institutions of the UN. Norway strongly supports the Secretary General's call for a surge in peace diplomacy, and we are convinced that the reforms that we have adopted are gradually making the UN more conflict sensitive and agile at a country level. The UN system is now better positioned to take a system-wide approach. The UN's political missions, such as the UN's Office for West Africa and the Sahel, play a crucial role with regard to preventive diplomacy and mediation. We believe that the Security Council can benefit more from the combined resources of the new generation of resident coordinators and the UN country teams in its efforts to sustain peace. Mr. President, war and conflict hits the civilian populations hardest, and Norway remains deeply concerned that the humanitarian toll of conflict and fragility is continuing to rise, further exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Protecting civilians must be at the core of our interventions, with particular attention focused on those who are most vulnerable. A lack of protection fuels conflict. It fuels displacement and mistrust. Attacks against school children, such as those carried out by the Boko Haram, are unacceptable. All children must be protected and have safe access to education and be safe at school. In the midst of devastation and trauma, it is very often up to women to rebuild what has been destroyed: trust and unity, infrastructure and institutions. In Mali, Norway has worked with a mandate from all signatory parties to support increased, legitimate and representative inclusion of women in the formal committees in charge of implementing the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement for Northern Mali. The inclusion of women is a matter of rights, but it's also a matter of results. No society can truly succeed without the active involvement of women. Mr. President, the Security Council has a charter-based mandate to prevent conflict using peaceful means. We believe that the Council should have a stronger focus on early warning and pay more attention to fragile states threatened by conflict. We must broaden the analysis and strengthen the Council's capacity to act. Initiatives such as the informal situational awareness briefings and fact-finding missions are positive steps, but they could be used more actively by the Council to engage before conflict erupts. Efforts to avert and prevent conflict by peaceful means do not only reduce human suffering, they also save the international community the considerable costs of peace operations and rebuilding societies after conflict. Mr. President, UN peace operations play a key role in addressing issues of fragility when implementing their mandates. This includes efforts to build the capacity of judicial and security enforcement institutions and to address impunity and to promote the rule of law. These institutions are vital to maintaining stability beyond the lifetime of the mission. The Peacebuilding Commission's role and resources could be better utilized, especially in transition situations where peace operations are being phased out. Working together better equips the UN and regional organizations, such as the African Union, to understand and tackle emerging security threats, including the rise of non-state actors in conflict. We commend the achievements of AMISOM in securing areas previously controlled by Al-Shabaab in Somalia. As an important supplement to the military effort, Norway took an early decision to make stabilization funds available to Somali authorities and institutions for service delivery. Mr. President, Norway's interests and respect for international law, including international humanitarian and human rights law, will form the foundation for our work in the Security Council. As a member of the Council, we will use the knowledge we have gained from our engagement in peace processes to strengthen the Council's conflict prevention and resolution efforts, also in fragile contexts. We will use our commitment to the Women, Peace and Security agenda to ensure that women's participation and rights are safeguarded in UN peace and security efforts. We will work to strengthen the protection of civilians, including children. We will use our knowledge and experience of humanitarian work and perspectives from civil society organizations into the Council. Finally, Norway will work to ensure that the Security Council discusses climate-related security risks in specific country contexts and also constantly assess the potential impacts of climate change on all parts of the Council's agenda. If we act today, we can prevent the crisis of tomorrow. Mr. President, Secretary General, and all other excellent briefers and excellencies, thank you so much for giving me the floor, or I would say rather the screen, in this first intervention as an elected member of the Security Council. Thank you.
شكرا لك سيدتي على ما جاء في كلمتك الهامة، وأعطي
Minister of State of the United Kingdom. Thank you very much, Mr. Cleverly. I now give the floor to Mr. Lee Hoi Trung, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam. You have the floor. Thank you, Your Excellency, for that statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Thomas Byrne, Minister of State for the Department of the Taoiseach and the Department of Foreign Affairs. And through you, Minister of State, I'd like to congratulate your country on its accession to our council. You have the floor, sir.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Byron for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, Minister of State for Tourism, French Nationals Abroad and Francophonie, attached to the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France.
Thank you very much, President, Secretary General, President, Chair of the African Union Commission, Ministers, friends. I would like to warmly congratulate Tunisia at the outset, who is taking over the presidency of the Security Council. And to the Nigerian people, France's condolences following the attacks perpetrated on the 2nd of January in Niger in the villages of Chibungu and Zarumdaraye, which led to the death of dozens of civilians and caused a lot of injuries too. France strongly condemns these odious crimes, and those perpetrators must be brought to justice. President, I'd like to thank you for convening this meeting and also thank the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the African Union Commission and former President of Liberia too. This debate is fully in line with a debate that we had in March 2018 on peacekeeping operations. At the time, it was the Dutch presidency of the Council, and I'd like to make 3 points here today. One statement. Firstly, we need to really understand the factors for fragility and the consequences. And secondly, also recall how much progress we've made. There has been reform in the UN system. And then thirdly, also perhaps like to bring up the modalities for how we can develop our interventions. So for my first point, one thing I'd like to state. So we need to carry out an effort to analyse. This is what you invited us to do, and this is essential so we can better grasp the factors for fragility and the political consequences on the UN's action and with its partners. The factors for fragility, as has been said before, are multidimensional. They can threaten peace and international peace and security. They also create endless cycles of crises. But they do have a common denominator. That is the weakness of states. This fragility exposes people and UN personnel to new types of risks, to more dangerous environments and threats which are ever-changing. These threats flourish in a context where institutional partners are weakened, or sometimes when governance is absent. They also provide a breeding ground for the development of terrorism, and they undermine peace processes. So, we need to break our silos in how we act. So we need to address crises and their regional in the regional dimension, and also focus and beyond that crisis management on prevention, on capacity building for states, and peace building. And then also we need to go beyond the security response, which is obviously indispensable, but we need to also address the factors that lead to fragility as a whole. I'm thinking particularly the impact of climate change, the situation of IDPs and refugees, as well as humanitarian and health crises, challenges, or the lack of inclusivity in political processes, particularly pertaining to women and young people. So this is the approach that France is promoting within the UN and within the Security Council. So in this current health crisis that is still underway, and the appeal for the global ceasefire that you launched, Secretary General, on the 23rd of March 2020, and then the also unanimous adoption of, in July last, of Resolution 2532, which was jointly submitted by France and Tunisia. These were all vital milestones in the collective response that the international community should be providing. So my second point, as I said, this is to note how far we've come. Under your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, the UN system has indeed been able to reform to better adapt to these challenges. When faced with more and more demanding environments, peacekeeping operations have, I believe, become more effective, more robust and more agile. Civilian protection is at the heart of their mandate, as well as the promotion of strict respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. And then in order to support these developments, I think that we need mobile and reactive troops more than ever. They need to be well equipped and well informed, including on a linguistic front. I'm particularly thinking about our action here with a francophonie and how we support the French language. And this allows us in French-speaking areas to have good relations with local people. So this is why France supports the efforts, reform efforts of the Secretary General through the Action for Peacekeeping initiative. I'd like to take this opportunity also to pay tribute to those blue helmets who died, and particularly the 60 soldiers who were killed in 2020. I'd also like to congratulate them. The resilience of the peacekeeping operations have demonstrated when faced with the COVID-19 crisis, and the commitment of the peacekeepers alongside host states to provide their support to managing this unprecedented crisis. The development and integration of these instruments for peace building has also progressed. The PBC, the Peace Building Commission, is playing a key role, and that's growing. The Peace Building Fund has become a major source of leverage, and there it has proven itself. This is why France will quadruple its contribution to this fund, which peacekeeping operations also made efforts to strengthen the integration of the civilian and military components, and this remains something that we should continue doing. And thirdly, this will be my third point, lastly, our responsibility is also to be able to develop and know how to develop our frameworks for intervention. Managing crises must also take into account the regional dimension. To address them, it might be able to leverage partnerships, particularly with the African Union, and I'd like to call in this connection that France's support for predictable and sustainable funding for African peacekeeping operations, including based on mandatory contributions of the UN. The support for ad hoc operations must also make progress, and here in this connection, the G5 Sahel Joint Force is an example that we should promote. Our objective is that it becomes fully autonomous, and to achieve this, it also needs support that is ambitious as possible, and the Security Council must contribute to this. In addition, lasting peace can only take shape if it is deeply rooted in the sustainable development and the anticipation of the risks linked to climate change. The climate dimension and the implementation of the 2030 Agenda must also be taken into account systematically. This is something that we are very committed to. We are holding a World Planet Summit, and this is an approach that we are pursuing with our partners as part of the Coalition for the Sahel, and the fourth pillar of this is this Sahel Alliance. In this context, France supports the recommendation to task the United Nations with a mission for analysis and early warning of the impacts of climate change on international security through a biennial report of the Secretary General to the General Assembly and to the Security Council. Finally, the management of transitions requires further flexibility to avoid an abrupt withdrawal of international presence when, for example, a peacekeeping operation is closed. This council can contribute to this in creating, by example, a special political mission to support the authorities following the departure of blue helmets, as is the case in Sudan. And the follow-up role of the Peace Building Commission is also very useful to maintain the attention of the international community on the issue and to provide a regional response to resolving the crisis. And part of this framework, it's important that international backers can mobilize to ensure a link between the country teams and under the authority of the resident coordination, and this needs to be able to lead the transition. President, you've invited us to think about an area where the challenges are numerous for the international community. We have the tools to address this. At the time when the Security Council is celebrating its 75th anniversary, you can count on France to fully play its role, resolutely, as it always does. I thank you very much.
I thank you, sir, for this important intervention. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Harsh Vardhan Shringla, the Foreign Secretary from India. And on this occasion, I would like to congratulate you again for joining the Security Council. You have the floor, sir.
Third, full respect for national ownership can never be overemphasized. We should recognize the primacy of national governments and national ownership in identifying and driving priorities, strategies, and activities for sustaining peace. Fourth, the Security Council should remain respectful of the regional approach adopted by countries in collaboration with regional organizations to address common challenges. The African Union has a leadership role to play in consolidating peace and post-conflict reconstruction in Africa. The collaboration between the UN and the African Union and sub-regional organizations such as ECOWAS, ECCAS, SDAC, and IGAD has yielded positive results. The African Union Policy Framework for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development, informed by lessons learned from past mistakes, as well as best practices, offers a roadmap towards sustainable peace and development. The African leadership has already taken important initiatives, such as the high-level panel on fragile states, to respond to the needs of countries in a flexible and rapid manner. Fifth, we need to ensure that the UN and its presence on the ground, its peacekeeping operations and special political missions are sufficiently mandated and resourced to implement a comprehensive understanding of peace and security. Having contributed significantly to UN peacekeeping in Africa for 6 decades, we have seen how peacekeeping missions are struggling to implement ambitious mandates. Peacekeeping missions should have a clear and well thought out exit strategy. Sixth, it is important to actively support the post-conflict reconstruction agenda of Africa. In this regard, the UN Peacebuilding Commission's efforts should be strengthened. Their efforts should be to prioritize the focus of UN efforts and coordinate the role of international financial institutions, the private sector, and civil society organizations. Seventh, the role of technology, especially digital technology, to improve public services, promote transparency in governance, and enhance the reach of democracy, human rights, and gender sensitivity has not yet been sufficiently appreciated and factored in. COVID has brought us unparalleled grief, but also helped us to do things differently. We need to factor in technology with a human face in this mix. Finally, Africa today is facing serious challenges posed by the growth of terrorism, particularly in the Sahel and Horn of Africa. In this regard, initiatives such as AMISOM, G5 Sahel Joint Force, and Multinational Joint Task Force need more robust support from the Security Council and the international community. Mr. President, on a larger note, the Council needs to introspect that while more than half of the country issues on the Council's agenda pertain to Africa, the African continent does not have even a single voice amongst the permanent membership to defend its own interests. We need to correct this historical anomaly and collectively support the Ezulwini consensus. Mr. President, the bonds between India and Africa have been forged over several centuries. Long-standing trade and diaspora links across the Indian Ocean, a shared colonial past, and our common developmental challenges have shaped India-Africa relations. India has worked together with African partners to eliminate the evils of colonialism and apartheid. We have worked together for a fairer global governance system, including a more equitable global economic order. We have worked together on a development agenda for the benefit of our peoples. Under our development partnership with Africa, India has reached out to 43 African countries. We have executed 189 developmental projects in 37 African countries, and around 77 projects are under execution with a total outlay of $12.86 billion. At the third India-Africa Forum Summit held in 2015, India announced $10 billion in lines of credit and $600 million in grant assistance to African countries. We have committed $1.7 billion as soft loans for solar projects, including in Africa, as our commitment to the International Solar Alliance. India has offered 50,000 scholarships to African students. We are actively engaged with capacity building of the security forces in several countries in Africa. Counterinsurgency and counterterrorism training is one of the significant areas of our defense training programs. Our ties are also driven by new partnerships in the digital domain. Premier Indian institutions and hospitals have been linked to 16 African countries to offer tele-education and telemedicine services through the e-Vidya Bharati and e-Arogya Bharati portals. India has supplied critical medicines to several African countries to help them fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We have also responded to the call of the Secretary General and upgraded our peacekeeping hospitals in the DRC and South Sudan during the peak of the pandemic. India has always supported African entrepreneurship and market access. India was the first developing country to provide duty-free, quota-free market access to LDCs, which has been available over the years to 33 countries in Africa. India is Africa's third largest export destination. Indian companies have invested over $54 billion in Africa and created hundreds of thousands of employment opportunities. India is also extending debt relief to African countries under the G20 initiative. Mr. President, India welcomes the evolution and rise of Africa as a key factor in the contemporary world. We are committed to supporting African countries in this endeavor as per African priorities and without conditionalities. This is in keeping with the 10 guiding principles of India's engagement with Africa, as enunciated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his address to the Parliament of Uganda in July 2018. India will continue to support Africa's aspirations and work towards empowering Africa for a future that is founded on the principles of inclusivity, sustainability, transparency, and socioeconomic development with dignity and respect. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Shringla, for this important intervention. And I now give the floor to Mr. Marcello Ebrard Casabon, the Foreign Minister of Mexico. And on this occasion, I congratulate Mexico on joining the Security Council. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, President. First of all, I would like to thank Tunisia for convening this open debate on challenges of maintaining peace and security in fragile contexts. And I would like to thank Secretary General, Mr. Mahamat, and Ms. Sirleaf for attending the meeting. First of all, I would like to express on behalf of Mexico our condolences to Niger and our condemnation in the strongest possible terms of terrorism wherever it occurs. We would like to express our sympathies and condolences to Niger. This topic of peace and security in the context of fragile contexts has to be addressed so that we can come up with effective responses to deal with fragility, which may lead to conflict situations arising or being prolonged. Threats to international peace and security are multidimensional, and they constantly evolve. These threats are not just military or political in nature, but they are linked to development issues as well as human rights and environmental factors and even health. Over the last few years, we have seen new cycles of violence and conflicts exacerbated by extreme poverty, economic inequalities, environmental degradation, food insecurity, and violations of human rights, discrimination, and the irresponsible trafficking of weapons. COVID-19 has added to all of these situations, and that is why there has to be a broader response based on solidarity to tackle the root causes of conflict. The interpreter apologizes, but the sound is too poor to guarantee faithful interpretation.
Para hacer frente a las legítimas demandas de su población. No se puede mantener la paz si no se impulsa el fortalecimiento de las instituciones nacionales y la participación incluyente y activa de toda la sociedad, en particular de las mujeres y los jóvenes. México cree firmemente en la paz sostenible como eje central sobre el que debe apoyarse la arquitectura de prevención y de consolidación de la paz de las Naciones Unidas. Celebramos la reciente adopción por la Asamblea General y el Consejo de Seguridad de las resoluciones gemelas sobre el examen 2020 de la arquitectura de consolidación de la paz, las cuales reafirman que la paz sostenible es fundamental para garantizar los tres pilares de la organización, además de ser una responsabilidad compartida del sistema ONU en su conjunto. Debemos buscar soluciones con un enfoque de prevención que contemple medidas incluyentes. El incremento de las crisis humanitarias prolongadas que surgen de los contextos frágiles
Thank you very much for your statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States of America.
President Saeed, thank you so much for organizing this open debate. This is a timely issue to discuss as we begin a new year of work in the Security Council. And thank you to the Secretary General, Chairperson, and Madam President for your comprehensive overviews this morning. Fragile states are often characterized by their vulnerability to armed conflict, large-scale violence, or other instability, including the inability to manage transactional threats. Fragility can result from ineffective and unaccountable governance, weak social cohesion, and corrupt institutions or leaders who do not respect human rights. Fragile states are particularly susceptible to destabilizing violence and armed conflicts. The rise of terrorist activities and violent extremism makes them even more vulnerable. And the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated this fragility, undermined public health, contributed to mass unemployment, threatened food security, increased violence against women, and reinforced or even created political and social divisions. Within fragile states, weak institutions, corruption, diminished respect for the rule of law, and authoritarianism increase the risk for violent conflict and instability over the long term and open the door for more cycles of political subversion and violence. Externally, malign actors seek to weaponize instability against other states. Iran, for example, undermines the stability of its neighbors by using fragile states or non-state actors as proxies, contributing to protracted conflicts and complex humanitarian crises. Fragility and conflict have given rise to historic levels of displacement and humanitarian need. There are now an estimated to be 51 million internally displaced people globally, while the number of refugees has doubled to 20 million people. Humanitarian needs continue outpacing resources by billions of dollars every year, and in 2021, a record number of people, at least 235 million, will need humanitarian assistance. For these reasons, we must help fragile states improve their internal stability lest they become failed states. Each of us has a critical role to play because problems in fragile states do not remain inside their borders. Fragile states can export their fragility to their neighbors as violence, pollution, and similar issues do not stop at boundaries and can threaten wider international peace and security. We must refine the role of the Security Council in addressing conflicts and state fragility. UN missions that operate in complex emergencies or conflicts must not be politicized. Rather, we should strive to make them more effective. This means providing principled humanitarian assistance that is timelier and more efficient through greater burden sharing and improved coordination of our humanitarian, development, and peacekeeping efforts. The United States has reaffirmed its commitment to conflict prevention and addressing the fragility with the Global Fragility Act of 2019 and the recently released U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. This important strategy places local solutions, ownership, and accountability at the heart of the U.S. approach to preventing conflict, stabilizing conflict-affected areas, promoting partnerships for long-term stability, and building resilience and self-reliance in states. The United States supports locally driven political solutions to address the political factors that cause fragility, and we target our foreign assistance accordingly. 70% of all assistance provided by the U.S. Agency for International Development goes to fragile states, accounting for roughly 50% of all U.S. foreign assistance. In the past 5 years, the U.S. has provided approximately $30 billion in foreign assistance in the 15 most fragile countries, as identified by the OECD. In November 2020, the OECD commended the United States for its prominent role in fighting transnational corruption that undermines good governance and responsive state institutions. The United States will continue to be a leader in providing such assistance, and we welcome increased efforts by our partners. We will continue encouraging other governments to contribute to the collective response against complex crises and fragility. Countries with higher rates of gender inequality are more vulnerable to conflict. We therefore prioritize the meaningful participation of women in efforts to prevent and resolve conflict. The United States demonstrated our global leadership and commitment with President Trump's signing of the U.S. Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017 and the administration's release of a bold and innovative Women, Peace, Security Strategy in June 2019. Our new strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability incorporates WPS principles into all elements of country and regional planning processes. Peacekeeping operations are a key tool in both advancing international peace and security and creating the space for states to address the root causes of conflict. As part of our efforts to help address fragility, the United States continues to lead the world's contributions to UN peacekeeping operations, contributing 25% of the UN peacekeeping budget. Thank you again, Mr. President, for convening today's debate. The Security Council's mandate to address threats to international peace and security, including threats deriving from intrastate conflict, means that we must be prepared to address these issues in practical terms beyond just these useful debates. We must turn our words into actions. We look forward to working with you to do just that. Thank you again, Mr. President.
شكرا لك سيدتي على هذا البيان الهام، وأعطي الآن الكلمة إلى مندوب الصين. لك الكلمة.
Mr. President, China congratulates Tunisia on assuming the presidency of the Council in January and welcomes President Said and Prime Minister Machichi to preside over today's meeting. I also wish to thank UN Secretary Guterres, Chairman Faki of the AU Commission, and former President Sirleaf of Liberia for their important briefings. The year 2020 has just ended as an extraordinary year during which the spread of COVID-19 triggered a global crisis, exposing many vulnerabilities in the global and national governance systems. The pandemic, together with unilateralism, climate change, food insecurity, cross-border crime, terrorist activities, and other factors, reinforced each other, posing unprecedented challenges toward peace and development, with African countries bearing the brunt. Through this turbulent year, we have felt more deeply than ever that all countries are interdependent and share will and woe, and believe more firmly than ever in the importance of multilateralism and cooperation to meeting the challenges. There are more reasons than ever to support the United Nations in playing an important role in maintaining international peace and security and achieving common development. In connection with today's topic, I would like to elaborate on the following 3 points. First, we should strengthen our confidence and work together to fight the pandemic. The global pandemic is surging in a new wave. Combating the pandemic in unity is the top priority for the international community. All countries should put people and their lives first, respect science, join hands to advance international anti-epidemic cooperation, and strengthen joint prevention and control in order to eliminate the impact of the pandemic as soon as possible. We must promote the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2532 and Secretary General's Global Ceasefire Appeal, strengthen mediation efforts, and promote dialogue and political settlement of issues in order to create a favorable political and security environment for countries to respond to the pandemic. It is necessary to continue to actively provide anti-epidemic assistance to countries and regions in need, and ensure that vaccines are equitably distributed as a global public good to the benefit of developing countries in particular. In this global public health crisis, China has actively participated in and supported the global response to the pandemic by launching the unprecedented largest humanitarian operation, providing anti-epidemic assistance to more than 150 countries and 10 international organizations. sending teams of medical experts to 16 African countries and establishing cooperation mechanisms with counterpart hospitals in 42 African countries. The African Center for Disease Control and Prevention headquarter construction project, assisted by China, has started recently with the laying of foundation. China is the first to promise to make the vaccine a global public good and will earnestly honor its commitment by making contributions to enabling developing countries to have access to affordable vaccines. Second, we should increase import to enhance development resilience. Underdevelopment is the root cause of many problems, especially in the countries and regions in conflict. Increasing investment in the field of development to strengthen economic and social weak links is the fundamental way to eliminate various risk factors, lay a solid foundation for peace, and achieve long-term stability. Currently, the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is encountering new major hurdles, with the developing countries facing numerous difficulties, threatening to further widen the gap between the North and the South. The international community should have a greater sense of urgency to tackle development issues and advance the implementation of the 2030 Agenda in a comprehensive, balanced, and vigorous manner. Great attention should be paid to the field of peace building, to support post-conflict countries in formulating independent development strategies, strengthening government capacity, building social consensus, and taking a path of sustainable development that matches their national conditions. The focus should be on poverty eradication to prevent a major reversal of the achievements of global poverty reduction. It is necessary to support the developing countries in putting more development resources into education, health, and infrastructure construction, among others, promoting economic and social rebuilding and enhancing sustainable development capacity. Climate change is a development issue, after all. China will respond to climate change with firm resolve and a responsible attitude, striving to reach the peak of carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. We hope that all countries in the world, including all members of the Security Council, especially the developed countries, will also take concrete actions to jointly promote the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Third, we should uphold multilateralism and leverage the important role of the United Nations. The UN embodies the yearning and determination of the people of the world to help each other in solidarity and jointly build a better future. In the face of increasingly complex and severe global challenges, no country can work alone. Achieving better unity and progress under the banner of the UN is our only choice to deal with various uncertainties and vulnerabilities in search of solutions. We must reaffirm our commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, firmly safeguard the international system with the UN at the center, maintain the international order based on international law, fulfill our obligations as member states, strengthen capacity building in the UN and other international institutions, and support the UN in playing its central coordinating role in international affairs. We must promote the strengthening and improvement of the global governance system, adhere to the principle of extensive consultation and joint contribution for shared benefits, respond to traditional and non-traditional security threats in an integrated manner, and give more prominence to new challenges such as public health and climate change on the international agenda in search of more equitable, effective, and lasting solutions. The Security Council shoulders the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. Under the new situation, it must step up its efforts to promote the political settlement process, increase its good offices and mediation, and better fulfill its responsibilities under the Charter. We need to pay more attention to African issues by increasing import in Africa and supporting the efforts of the African Union and African countries to achieve peace. In the face of various multifaceted security risks and challenges, the Security Council, the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, the Peacebuilding Commission, and relevant regional organizations should perform their respective functions, strengthen collaboration, and forge synergy. Mr. President, peace and security are the eternal aspirations of mankind while being topics full of complex challenges. China is ready to work with other countries in the world to hold high the banner of multilateralism and make joint efforts to build a peaceful, prosperous, and beautiful home on the earth. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for that very important statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation. Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to welcome the participation in today's meeting of the President of the Tunis Republic, Kais Saied, as the President of the Security Council. We'd like to thank the Secretary General of the UN, António Guterres, the Chairperson of the African Union, Mr. Moussa Faki Mohamed, and also the former President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, for their briefings. Of course, we express our sincere condolences to Niger for the terrible, devastating terrorist attack that happened at the beginning of the month. The topic of today's meeting on factors impacting peace and security in fragile contexts is extremely broad in context. I believe that all would agree that the topic under discussion is pertinent not just to be discussed in the Security Council, but in other UN bodies as well. The leading role in solving issues that are not directly linked to the maintenance of international peace and security should be played by the relevant fora that have the relevant expertise and instruments to develop long-term solutions. Furthermore, assistance and stepping up efforts of different UN structures can be useful, but only when it is appropriate and when all member states have agreed upon this. It's also important to avoid duplication of efforts among UN structures. Mr. President, in the concept note to today's meeting, it's rightly pointed out that some factors that undermine stability in the world are the subject of discussion in the Security Council: combating climate change and its impact, and other environmental issues require practical measures focusing on the instruments of the development system of the UN and also on decisions taken under the UNFCCC and also under other decisions in the General Assembly and ECOSOC. Each UN body should work strictly complying with its own mandate. Effective work in the area of development will help to achieve the practical tasks of the field missions in line with the Council's mandate. The deterioration of the environment, inter alia as a result of climate change, may well have an impact on socio and economic development. In particular, this may rather lead to an unstable situation. In particular, if we're talking about countries in Africa, environmental issues, however, need to be considered given each and every individual situation with its own specifics. There should be no illegal exploitation of natural resources in Africa, inter alia, by external players who are exploiting the difficult situation to exert pressure on the government in order to achieve their own aims and goals. appropriate management of natural resources, including water and other natural resources, and the provision of assistance to vulnerable countries can help to ensure that such factors don't cause socio and economic instability. There are links between development and human rights. However, we are against automatically linking them and positioning them as universal factors causing conflict. We are convinced that the work of the international community in this area should not be based on an arbitrary interpretation of so-called indicators of crises. That would lead to potential abuse. Preventing and settling crises and also peace building should not be used for external interference. And this includes the illegal overthrowing of a government. Something that is undoubtedly a factor that destabilizes an already fragile situation is unilateral coercive measures and illegal sanctions imposed bypassing and circumventing the Security Council. We, and not just us, have been talking about this all the time, but some of our partners prefer either to ignore this or to dumb down the impact of such measures. We agree entirely with the Secretary General of the UN, who is calling for a lifting of unilateral coercive sanctions, including in General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. Sir, the primary responsibility for the response to dealing with challenges in their territory, it should be played by their own countries. The UN and Security Council should respond based on the country's national priorities. We agree with the thrust of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres' desire to strengthen cooperation between the UN and the AU. We believe that it's necessary to pool efforts to harness the capacities of both organizations to tackle conflicts on the continent, because Africans surely know best the situation in their own continent. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Excellency, Your Excellency, for that statement. I now give the floor to Estonia. You have the floor.
that the humankind is facing. Thank you, Mr. President.
لكم سعادة السفير على هذا البيان الهام.
I thank the Ambassador of Estonia. We have listened to the last speakers. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I would like to thank you all, Your Excellencies, for participating in today's meeting. You have shown your commitment to promoting international peace and security, especially in fragile contexts. We, as an international community, must focus on these areas of concern. I would also like to thank His Excellency, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. António Guterres, for his valuable participation and his presence in today's high-level meeting. I would also like to thank the briefers, Mr. Moussa Faki Mohammed and Ms. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, former President of Liberia. I thank them for their briefings. I would like to seize this opportunity to express my sincere condolences to Niger following the terrorist attacks on the 2nd of January. I express our support to the President and the people of Niger following this terrorist attack. We condemn terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Before concluding, I would like to inform the members of the Council that we received written statements for this debate from a number of member states, which are Italy, Japan, Liechtenstein, Malta, Portugal, Qatar, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, and Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement. In closing, I thank you once again for your participation in today's debate. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.